I still remember the smell of rain that morning. It had been drizzling since dawn, the kind of soft, reluctant rain that taps on windows like it's afraid to disturb anyone. I was standing by the kitchen sink, watching the drops race each other down the glass, when I heard Daniel's laughter echo from the hallway. For a moment, everything felt normal, perfect even. My husband's deep chuckle, the warmth of coffee in my hands, the faint hum of the radio. It was the kind of morning you never imagine will end in ruin. Daniel was on the phone, pacing, his voice half whispered, half amused. "You'll be here by 7? Good. I can't wait to see you." I smiled to myself. Our son Michael was bringing his fiancée home for dinner that night. It would be the first time we met her properly. Daniel sounded excited, and that made me happy. He hadn't laughed like that in months. At 52, I thought I understood marriage. The quiet routines, the small sacrifices, the occasional distance that years create. I never doubted the man who'd shared my bed for 27 years. I wiped my hands and walked toward him. "Everything ready for tonight?" I asked. He startled slightly, turning the phone face down on the counter. "Yeah, just, work stuff." "You know me," I nodded, not thinking twice. If there was one thing Daniel had mastered, it was the art of sounding sincere. That evening, our house glowed. Candles flickered on the dining table. I'd spent the whole afternoon preparing roast chicken with rosemary, mashed potatoes the way Michael liked them, and Daniel's favorite chocolate tart. When they arrived, my heart swelled. Michael looked radiant, his eyes full of pride as he introduced her. "This is Emily," he said, placing a gentle hand on the young woman's back. Emily. She was beautiful. Too beautiful for a name so simple. Dark hair pulled into a loose bun, eyes the color of storm clouds. She smiled nervously, holding out her hand. "It's such an honor to meet you, Mrs. Langford." "Please, call me Grace," I said. Her grip was soft, but her gaze, steady, searching. During dinner, Daniel was unusually talkative. He told old stories, laughed too loudly, filled Michael's glass before his own. Emily laughed at all his jokes, even the ones that had stopped being funny years ago. Something about the way she looked at him felt off, not obvious, not disrespectful, but intimate, as though they shared a secret I wasn't meant to notice. I brushed it off. After all, she was nervous, and Daniel had that fatherly charm that put people at ease. Still, a thin thread of discomfort wound its way through my chest. Later that night, after they left, Daniel seemed restless. He stood by the fireplace, swirling his drink, staring into the flames. "What do you think of her?" he asked. "She's lovely," I said honestly. "But she seems a little older than Michael, doesn't she?" He shrugged. "A few years, maybe." "Doesn't matter," I studied his face. His jaw tightened slightly. "Did I say something wrong?" I asked. He smiled, too quickly. "Of course not." But his eyes avoided mine. That was the first night I felt the quiet unease that would later consume my world. Days turned into weeks. Emily became a regular visitor. She helped me cook, offered to run errands, even accompanied me on my morning walks. She was charming, considerate, and always eager. And Daniel, he'd begun working late again. One Saturday, I drove to his office to surprise him with lunch. The receptionist looked puzzled. "Mr. Langford?" she said. "He left over an hour ago." "Oh," I smiled faintly, pretending not to care. Maybe I misunderstood. I ate that lunch alone in the car, watching the rain smear across the windshield. A small part of me whispered possibilities I refused to believe. The next morning, I decided to call Emily. "Hi, sweetheart," I said. "Could you stop by later?" "I want to show you something for the wedding." Her tone wavered. Um, sure, Mrs. Grace. What time?" "Anytime after 3. At 2:58, her car pulled into the driveway. Daniel's car wasn't there. I told myself it meant nothing. We spent an hour going through fabrics and invitations. She seemed distracted, her phone lighting up repeatedly on the table. Each time, she'd glance at it, then flip it over. "Everything okay?" I asked. She forced a smile. "Yeah, just wedding stuff." When she finally left, she hugged me. A long, shaky hug that felt more like goodbye than affection. I stood at the door, watching her drive away, unease blooming in my gut. That night, Daniel came home late again. He smelled faintly of perfume. Not mine. I said nothing. But as he showered, I noticed something glimmering in the pocket of his jacket. A bracelet. Delicate. Feminine. My breath caught. It wasn't mine. It wasn't even a style I'd seen in any of my friends' collections. But I had seen it. On Emily's wrist. The first night we met. I held it in my trembling hands, the truth pounding behind my ribs like a trapped bird. When Daniel came out, towel around his waist, I stood frozen, the bracelet dangling from my fingers. He froze too. For a heartbeat, silence swallowed us both. Then he said, calm and rehearsed, "Oh, that. I found it in Michael's car earlier. Must have fallen off." The lie was effortless. Too effortless. I smiled weakly. Of course. But something inside me cracked. Quietly. Invisibly. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the sound of his breathing beside me like static in my ears. In the following days, I started watching. Carefully. Patterns emerged. Sudden errands. Late meetings. Random bursts of tension when Emily's name came up. And then one afternoon, fate handed me the truth on a silver plate. I was driving home from the market when I saw Daniel's car parked outside an old motel on the edge of town. A familiar silver hatchback stood beside it. Emily's. My heart didn't shatter. It froze. I parked at a distance, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles went white. 10 minutes passed. Then the door opened. Daniel stepped out first, his shirt half-buttoned, glancing around nervously. Emily followed. Her hair was messy, her lipstick smudged. He leaned toward her, whispered something that made her laugh. The same laugh she once used at my dinner table. That was the moment I stopped breathing. The world went silent. The sound of betrayal is never loud. It's the quiet collapse of everything you believed in. I didn't confront them. Not that day. Not yet. I waited until he came home that night, smelling of mint and guilt. He kissed my cheek and said, "Long day." I nodded. "Mine too." As he disappeared into the bedroom, I stood in the kitchen, staring at the 2 empty coffee cups I'd bought that morning. One for me, one for him. I realized I'd never use them together again. But I also realized something else. This story wasn't going to end with screaming or broken dishes. No, I would end it differently. Quietly. Precisely. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge begins with silence. I didn't sleep that night. Not a single minute. I lay in bed beside Daniel, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. Steady, careless, peaceful. It's strange how a person can rest so easily while standing at the edge of destruction. At some point, the moonlight slipped through the curtains and fell across his face. I stared at him, searching for the man I married. The one who used to hold my hand when life got too heavy. The one who promised me honesty, loyalty, forever. All I saw was a stranger. I turned away, clutching the sheets like they were the only thing keeping me from falling apart. The next morning, everything looked normal. Almost insultingly normal. Daniel read the newspaper at breakfast. He even hummed softly, as if guilt had no place in his chest. When he looked up, he smiled. "You're quiet today," he said. "I'm just tired," I replied, hiding behind my coffee mug. He nodded and went back to reading. That's when I realized something terrifying. The man I once trusted completely could now lie to me without blinking. But I wasn't going to cry. Not yet. Tears were a luxury for people who still hoped. For the next week, I played my role perfectly. The loyal wife, the supportive mother, the calm hostess. When Michael came over, I smiled. When Emily visited, I greeted her warmly. Inside, I was studying them, observing every word, every glance, every tremor in their voices. One afternoon, as Emily helped me fold laundry, she said, "Michael told me you two are such an inspiration. I hope we're like you someday." Her voice cracked on the last word. I looked at her, really looked. Her hands were shaking slightly, her eyes rimmed with something that wasn't just guilt. It was fear. And in that moment, I understood something crucial. She wasn't in control. Whatever had happened between her and Daniel, it wasn't simple. It wasn't love. It was something darker. That evening, Daniel received a call while we were having dinner. He excused himself quickly, muttering, "Work thing." I waited until he left the room. His phone buzzed again, a message on the screen before it locked. "I can't keep doing this." "He'll find out, Emily." My breath hitched. My hands went cold. I memorized every word, every letter. When Daniel came back, I smiled sweetly and asked, "Everything all right?" He nodded, avoiding my eyes. "Of course," he said. "Just work." "Always work," I replied softly. He didn't catch the edge in my voice. The next morning, I drove to the lake house, our so-called sanctuary. It was a small cabin an hour from town, where we used to escape on weekends when Michael was little. Daniel hadn't mentioned it in months. When I arrived, the air felt wrong, too still, too staged. The curtains were drawn. The scent of Daniel's cologne lingered in the air. And on the nightstand, I saw it. A wine glass with lipstick on the rim. Emily's shade. I knew it instantly. There was also a photo frame. One of Michael and Emily, still in its gift wrapping, the kind you'd find on a registry. The realization burned like acid. This wasn't just a fling. They had brought our son's future into this place, a home built on love, now tainted by deceit. I sat on the edge of the bed and let silence fill the room. For a moment, I imagined myself screaming, breaking things, confronting him in fury. But no, that wasn't me anymore. Grace Langford didn't destroy. She dismantled. Quietly, deliberately. I left everything exactly where it was. Took a deep breath. And as I stepped outside, I made a promise. Not to punish them immediately, but to let them believe they'd won. That was the only way to break them completely. When I returned home, Daniel greeted me with a kiss on the cheek. "Where have you been?" "The lake house," I said casually. "Just needed air." He froze for half a second, then smiled. "Good idea." "You should go there more often," I wanted to laugh. If only he knew what I'd seen. The following days felt like walking through a play. Every line rehearsed, every smile forced. But beneath the surface, I was planning. I started gathering quiet evidence, photos, receipts, timestamps. Every lie he told, I recorded. Every word Emily said, I analyzed. And soon, I realized something heartbreaking. Michael didn't know. He was blissfully in love, preparing for a wedding built on betrayal. Watching him talk about Emily's kind heart and pure soul made me sick. But I couldn't tell him yet. Not until I had everything. One night I stood by the window, watching Daniel in the reflection. He was on his laptop, typing furiously, smiling faintly. A strange calm washed over me. For years, I'd built my life around protecting my family, holding it together even when it frayed. But now I saw the truth. Sometimes, saving a family means burning it down first. I whispered to myself, "You'll get your peace, Grace. Just not yet." Because healing doesn't start with forgiveness. It starts with justice. And I was ready to deliver mine. The morning after I made that promise to myself, I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. There was no fire in her eyes, no storm, only silence, heavy, calculating silence. That was when I understood something powerful. Silence is not weakness, it's strategy. I used to think revenge meant shouting, exposing, destroying, but real revenge, the kind that changes people forever, begins quietly. It starts with patience. So I began my performance. At breakfast, Daniel sat across from me, scrolling through his phone. I could almost predict his messages now. Little good mornings to Emily, hidden behind work emails. He didn't know that every lie left digital footprints, and I was following every one of them. He looked up and smiled, like nothing had changed. "You've been distant lately," he said. "Work stress?" I returned the smile. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just learning to listen more." He nodded, satisfied, not realizing the double meaning in my words. I was listening to everything. Later that week, Emily came over again. She brought a basket of homemade cookies, her usual sweet gesture, pretending everything was normal. "Grace," she said softly, "I just wanted to thank you for everything. You've treated me like family." I looked at her hands, trembling slightly as she set the basket down. Her ring caught the light. Michael's engagement ring, shining like a cruel joke. "You are family," I said, "at least for now." She froze for a moment. I watched her throat tighten before she forced a smile. "Thank you," she whispered, eyes darting away. There it was again. Fear. And that fear, it was starting to taste like justice. Over the next few days, I watched them unravel, slowly. They thought they were careful, meeting in secret, deleting messages, pretending to be strangers in public. But guilt has a sound, a rhythm, a pattern. Once you recognize it, you hear it everywhere. In Daniel's restless sighs, in Emily's shaking hands, in the sudden silence when I entered the room. The air around them was suffocating. Not because of what I knew, but because they knew that I might know. And that's where power truly begins. One evening, I invited Michael and Emily over for dinner. Daniel looked surprised, almost nervous when I told him. "Why now?" he asked. I smiled. "Because families should spend time together before the wedding, right?" He hesitated but nodded. "Of course." That night, the house smelled of rosemary and roasted chicken, his favorite. The same meal I used to cook when we were first married. When Michael and Emily arrived, the tension was thick enough to touch. Daniel barely made eye contact with her. Emily looked pale, her voice faint when she greeted me. I acted like nothing was wrong, laughed, told stories, poured wine. And in that calm, controlled performance, I realized I was no longer the victim. I was the director. Halfway through dinner, Michael excused himself to take a call from work. That left the three of us, me, Daniel, and Emily, sitting in the echo of clinking silverware. I leaned back, smiling. "So," I said gently, "how's the wedding planning going?" Emily's fork froze midair. Daniel coughed. "It's going well, right, Emily?" She nodded quickly. "Yes, of course. Everything's fine," I tilted my head. "You must be so excited. It's such a blessing to marry someone you love and trust." The silence that followed was delicious. Emily's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Daniel looked like he wanted to disappear. And I just smiled. A small, knowing curve of my lips. When Michael returned, the tension evaporated like a bad dream. He started talking about honeymoon destinations, laughing easily, unaware of the rot beneath the surface. I watched him, my son, my baby, and for the first time in weeks, I felt my heart ache again. He was innocent. He didn't deserve this, and I couldn't let him walk into a life built on betrayal, but I couldn't just tell him, not yet. If I did, he'd confront them, and they'd twist it, make me look like a jealous, paranoid mother. Number. The truth had to come from them. It had to destroy them publicly, irreversibly. That's when the idea began forming. The next day, I went into Daniel's study under the pretense of cleaning. I wasn't snooping. Not anymore. I was preparing. Hidden beneath the top drawer, taped under the desk, was his old phone, the one he claimed was dead. I plugged it in, waited for it to charge, and when it powered on, my heart stopped. There they were. Dozens of photos, messages, voice notes. Him and Emily, laughing, whispering, touching. Some from the lake house, others from hotel rooms. Every lie he told me was documented right there. Every moment they thought was hidden was now mine. I transferred everything to a hard drive, neatly labeled it memories, and tucked it away. Evidence wasn't just proof. It was leverage. That night, as I stood by the window again, the city lights blurred through the glass. I could hear Daniel in the shower, humming, completely unaware that his world was now a ticking clock. I whispered to myself, "You'll lose everything you built on lies, Daniel, but not by my hand, by your own, because that's the thing about betrayal. It always circles back, and when it does, it never misses its mark." By the time the sun rose the next morning, I already knew what I had to do. My goal wasn't just to make Daniel and Emily suffer. It was to let their own guilt devour them. No screaming, no confrontation, just quiet truth, revealed at the right time, in the right way. I started with small, almost invisible moves, the kind of things that make people question their own sanity. I changed the background photo on Daniel's laptop, the one he used every day for work. It used to be a picture of us and Michael at the lake house. I replaced it with a photo I found buried in his phone, a close-up of the lake itself, with 2 wine glasses sitting on the table outside the cabin. He never took that photo for me. He took it for her. When he opened his laptop that morning, I was watching from across the room. He froze. His eyes lingered on the screen. His fingers trembled slightly before he shut it closed and muttered, "Must be some syncing error." I didn't respond, just sipped my coffee and smiled. One move, one seed of doubt. The next few days, I kept my mask perfectly in place, calm, graceful, predictable. But I started weaving reminders of their guilt into every corner of their lives. Emily came by one afternoon to help finalize flower arrangements for the wedding. I made her tea, chamomile, her favorite. When she lifted the cup to her lips, her eyes caught something on the saucer. A small folded note I'd accidentally left there. It wasn't signed. It didn't accuse her. It simply read, "Secrets have short lives." Her hand shook so badly she almost dropped the cup. "Oh, are you all right, dear?" I asked softly. She forced a smile. Yes, just a bit dizzy." Of course she was. That was the first tremor of guilt beginning to take shape. Every move I made after that was precise, a performance of control. A perfume bottle left open in Daniel's car. Emily's scent. A lipstick stain on the rim of a wine glass he thought I hadn't noticed. A song playing softly in the background. The same one from that night at the lake house. Each one small enough to deny, but powerful enough to remind. Soon, Daniel started coming home later than usual. Not to see her. No, to avoid me. He'd enter the house quietly, pretending to be on work calls, pretending I didn't notice the exhaustion on his face. He was cracking, and I hadn't even spoken a word. One night, as I was setting the table for dinner, Daniel stood in the doorway watching me. His face was pale, his voice tight. "Grace," he said, "have you been going through my things?" I turned, pretending confusion. "Your things? Why would I?" He stared at me for a long moment, searching, doubting, afraid. Then he shook his head. "Nothing. Forget it." But he didn't eat that night. He just sat there, lost in thought, stabbing at his food without appetite. "Good. Let the silence eat you alive, Daniel." Meanwhile, Emily had started avoiding me. She made excuses not to come by, sent Michael to handle wedding details instead. But guilt is like gravity. It always pulls you back toward the truth. A week later, she called me out of nowhere. "Grace," she said, her voice trembling. "Could we talk? Just us?" "Of course," I replied gently. "Come over tomorrow." When she arrived, I could see the panic written all over her. She looked smaller somehow, fragile, frayed at the edges. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place she once sat talking about her dreams, her love for Michael. Now her hands fidgeted endlessly with her ring. "What's wrong, dear?" I asked, my tone light, almost motherly. She hesitated, then whispered, Have you ever done something you regret so much you can't breathe?" I tilted my head. "All the time." She looked up, startled by my calm. "Then how do you live with it?" she asked, eyes wet. I smiled softly. "You don't," I said. "You face it. Because the truth always catches you, one way or another." Her lips parted as if she wanted to confess. But then her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, eyes wide, and stood abruptly. I have to go," she stammered, grabbing her bag. As she walked out, I saw the name flashing on her screen. Daniel. I watched her car pull away, my heart pounding. This was it. The beginning of the end. They were falling apart faster than I could have imagined. All I needed to do now was guide them toward the final collapse. Gently, invisibly. Because destruction isn't about force. It's about precision. And I had become very, very precise. That night, I opened the hard drive again. Every message, every call, every photo. I studied them until my eyes blurred. But this time, I wasn't looking for proof. I was looking for timing. There was a charity gala coming up next week, one that Daniel and I attended every year. Michael and Emily would be there too, of course. Friends, family, colleagues, everyone who mattered. That would be the place where truth met daylight. But it wouldn't be me who told it. It would be them. As I shut down the computer and looked out the window, I caught my reflection in the glass. For the first time, I didn't see a broken woman. I saw someone reborn. A woman who had learned that sometimes, to heal, you must first become the storm that tears everything apart. The night of the gala arrived cloaked in glitter and noise, the kind of event where everyone smiles too brightly, laughs too loudly, and hides too much. The ballroom sparkled under crystal chandeliers, the music soft and elegant, the scent of expensive perfume mingling with wine and whispers. Daniel stood beside me in his black tuxedo, charming as ever. He was talking to a business partner, smiling, nodding, pretending. If you didn't know the truth, you'd think we were the perfect couple, power, poise, and history wrapped in satin and lies. Emily and Michael arrived a little later. She wore a pale blue dress, simple yet beautiful, her hair in soft curls that framed her face. But even from across the room, I could see her tension. Her eyes darted from me to Daniel, then quickly away, like a moth avoiding a flame. Michael, blissfully unaware, looked proud. Proud of his fiancée, proud of his father, proud of the life he thought he was building. My heart twisted. He didn't know he was standing on a landmine. And tonight, it was going to explode. I'd spent days preparing for this. Not chaos, not humiliation, but revelation. The kind that doesn't come from screaming. It comes from silence, from truth unrolling itself like a slow, merciless wave. Every step of this evening was orchestrated. Earlier in the afternoon, I'd sent the event planner a last-minute request, a short tribute video to celebrate our family's years of community work. It wasn't a lie. Daniel had done plenty of charity work, but the footage I gave her was not the footage he expected. As the night went on, the speeches began. Donors thanking donors, champagne glasses clinking, polite applause filling the air. Daniel leaned over and whispered, "They're playing a video about us next." I told them to use the old footage from last year. I smiled, calm as ever. "How thoughtful of you." He didn't notice the faint tremor in my voice. Not from fear, but from the sheer weight of control it took to remain still. Then the lights dimmed. The large screen flickered to life. At first, it was exactly what everyone expected. Photos of our family volunteering, smiling with children, shaking hands with officials. The crowd murmured approvingly, clapping lightly. Then, about 40 seconds in, the tone changed. A video clip appeared. Daniel and Emily at the lake house porch. The same wine glasses, the same view of the water. They weren't doing anything explicit, just laughing, too close, too familiar. But it was enough. The laughter in the room died instantly. Daniel's hand froze around his glass. Emily went pale. I didn't move. I just sat there, my face calm, my pulse steady. The clip ended abruptly, replaced by more charity images, as if nothing had happened. The event staff, oblivious to what they'd just shown, kept the program running. But the damage was done. Whispers spread like fire. People leaned in, eyes wide, murmuring questions they didn't dare say out loud. Daniel's jaw tightened. He turned toward me slowly, panic blooming in his eyes. "Grace," he hissed under his breath. "What the hell was that?" I met his gaze, steady, unflinching. "I don't know," I said softly. "Looks like the truth finally found the spotlight." He swallowed hard, eyes darting around the room. Emily looked like she might faint. Michael. Oh, my poor Michael. He was staring at the screen, confusion and disbelief swirling in his eyes. "Dad?" he whispered. "What was that? Why were you with Emily?" The room was spinning now. Whispers becoming murmurs, murmurs becoming noise. Daniel tried to stand, but I reached out and touched his arm, gently, firmly. "Sit down," I whispered. He froze. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried something heavier than anger. Finality. "Don't make a scene," I said. "Not here." For the first time in our marriage, he obeyed me without question. The program ended soon after, but the atmosphere never recovered. Guests avoided our table, offering awkward smiles before turning away. Michael stood silently, his face pale, his mind breaking apart in real time. Emily was trembling. Her lipstick was smudged, her hands clutching her purse like a lifeline. And me? I just sat there, composed, my smile barely visible, a woman surrounded by ruins she'd quietly built. When the lights came back on, I leaned closer to Daniel. "You always said honesty was the foundation of family," I murmured. "I just gave you a chance to prove it." He didn't respond. His throat bobbed once before he turned away, shame clouding his face. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp. Guests were whispering in corners, their voices hushed but urgent. Michael walked ahead, his shoulders stiff, his steps uneven. Daniel and Emily followed behind, two guilty souls tethered by the same secret. I walked last, slowly, deliberately. Every footstep felt like closure. That night, the house was silent. Michael had locked himself in his room. Emily had left without a word. Daniel was sitting in the study, head in his hands, surrounded by shadows. I stood in the doorway watching him. The man who'd built a life on my love, then traded it for something cheap, something fleeting. He looked up at me, eyes red, voice cracking. "Why did you do this, Grace?" I took a breath, my tone calm, even. "I didn't do anything. I just stopped protecting your lies." He dropped his gaze, tears falling freely now. For the first time, I saw not my husband, but a stranger, broken and small. And yet, somewhere inside me, pain still stirred. Because revenge doesn't erase love, it just shows you what it was worth. That night, I didn't sleep again. I sat by the window until dawn, watching the first light creep across the floor. I'd done what I set out to do. I'd made them face themselves. But now, as the silence settled around me, I realized the hardest part was still ahead. Because once the truth is out, what do you do with what's left? The next morning, the house was heavy with silence, the kind of silence that feels alive, like it's listening. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, soft and pale, cutting across the mess of last night. An empty wine glass, Daniel's jacket on the floor, a family photo turned face down on the mantel. For years, this home had been my sanctuary. Now it felt like a crime scene, only the victim wasn't a person. It was trust. I moved through the house slowly, barefoot on the cold marble floor. Each step echoed, hollow and strange, as if the walls were whispering fragments of the night before. Upstairs, Michael's door was still shut. I paused outside, listening. No movement, no sound. I wanted to knock, to tell him I was sorry, not for what I'd done, but for what he had to see. But some wounds need space to breathe before they can be spoken to. So I turned away. Daniel was still in the study. He hadn't slept either. The lamp was still on, casting a weak circle of light around him. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale, his phone lying on the table, unanswered messages glowing on the screen. He looked up when I entered. "Grace, please." I raised a hand gently. "Don't," I said. "There's nothing left to explain." He swallowed hard. "You've destroyed everything." I met his gaze, steady and tired. "No, Daniel. You destroyed everything. I just stopped pretending it was still standing." He opened his mouth again, but no words came. Only a deep, broken exhale. The sound of a man realizing the truth wasn't his to control anymore. Later that morning, I made breakfast. Not because anyone would eat, but because routine is how we trick pain into staying quiet. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen, but even that felt wrong. Too normal for the kind of day it was. Michael came downstairs eventually. He looked older. Not in years, but in spirit. The boy who'd once laughed with his father over burnt pancakes was gone. In his place stood a man who had seen the cost of betrayal up close. He didn't look at me when he sat down. His voice was low. "Was it true?" I nodded. "Yes." A silence stretched between us, fragile as glass. He clenched his jaw. "Since when?" "Almost a year," I whispered. He closed his eyes, pain flickering across his face. I wanted to reach for his hand, but something stopped me. The knowledge that he needed his anger. It was the only thing keeping him from breaking completely. After a long moment, he stood up. "I need to get out of here." I didn't stop him. Sometimes love means letting someone walk away, even when it kills you. When the door closed behind him, I finally let myself cry. Not the loud, dramatic kind of crying, but the quiet kind that feels endless. Tears slipped down my cheeks without sound, my body still, my hands clutching the edge of the counter like it might hold me together. For years, I'd carried everyone else's pain. Now, I was drowning in my own. The days that followed blurred together. The scandal spread fast. Whispers in town, subtle glances at the grocery store, messages from concerned friends. People love tragedy when it doesn't belong to them. Emily disappeared. Daniel moved into a hotel to give space, though I knew it was more about shame than consideration, and Michael stopped answering calls. The house became an echo chamber of memories. Laughter turned into ghosts. Photos became accusations. At night, I'd sit by the window, watching the streetlights flicker. Each one reminded me of a truth I'd tried to ignore. You can destroy someone quietly and still lose yourself in the process. One evening, about a week later, I got a message from Emily. It was short. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm sorry for everything. You didn't deserve any of it. I stared at it for a long time. There was no anger left in me, only exhaustion. So I typed back. We all pay for what we break, Emily. Some sooner, some later. Take care of yourself. And that was the last time we ever spoke. As for Daniel, he came by a few days later to collect some things. He stood in the doorway, unsure, like a stranger waiting for permission to enter. I'll be gone by the weekend, he said quietly. I nodded. Good. He hesitated, looking around the house, at the photographs, the flowers, the memories. Grace, he said finally, voice trembling. I did love you. I just lost myself somewhere along the way. I looked at him for a long time. Maybe he meant it. Maybe he didn't. But either way, it didn't matter anymore. Then I hope, I said softly, you find the version of yourself that knows how to keep love next time. He nodded once, eyes wet, and walked out. The door closed behind him with a quiet click that felt like an ending, not just to a marriage, but to a lifetime. That night, I went up to Michael's room. It was empty, his bed neatly made, a few of his things missing. He'd moved in with a friend, I later learned. He didn't say goodbye. I sat on the edge of his bed, clutching one of his childhood drawings, a stick figure family, smiling under a sun. Back then, love had seemed simple. Now, I wasn't sure what it meant anymore. I whispered into the darkness, I'm sorry, my boy. I only wanted to protect you, and for the first time since the gala, I prayed. Not for revenge, not for justice, but for peace. Peace for him. Peace for me. Peace for whatever future still waited on the other side of the pain. That was the night I decided to leave. Not to run away, but to start over. To find out who Grace was before betrayal defined her. Because if there's one thing I'd learned through all of this, it's that forgiveness doesn't mean letting someone back in. It means freeing yourself from their hold. And that was the first step toward healing. Leaving that house felt like stepping out of a memory I no longer belonged to. The morning air was sharp, the sky the color of ash. I loaded the last box into the back seat and stood there for a long moment, staring at the front door. So many years of birthdays, dinners, laughter, and lies, all sealed behind that wooden frame. I whispered a small goodbye, not to Daniel or Emily, but to the woman who used to live here, the one who thought she couldn't survive without them. Then I drove away. The road stretched endlessly, cutting through golden fields and quiet towns. For the first time in months, I didn't have a destination. I just drove until the city disappeared in the rearview mirror and the world felt big again. By sunset, I reached a small coastal town, a place where no one knew my name. The air smelled of salt and pine. Seagulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp but strangely comforting. I rented a tiny cottage on the edge of a cliff, its windows overlooking the ocean. That first night, I stood outside, wind tugging at my hair, listening to the rhythmic crash of waves. Each one sounded like a heartbeat, steady and alive. For months, my world had been defined by betrayal. Here, the sea didn't care who I was or what I'd lost. It just existed. Constant. Infinite. I needed that kind of peace. Days passed quietly. I learned to live with myself again. Mornings with coffee on the porch. Evenings with books I'd always meant to read. The silence that used to suffocate me now felt sacred. Sometimes I'd walk down to the beach, letting the cold water wash over my feet. The waves always pulled back, just far enough to remind me that letting go doesn't mean disappearing. It means learning when to return. I started painting again. It had been years since I'd picked up a brush, but the colors came naturally. Blues, grays, golds. Pain makes strange art. It turns every color into emotion. The local gallery owner noticed one of my paintings drying by the window and asked if I'd ever considered exhibiting. I laughed, but she insisted. That conversation led to my first small show 2 months later. People came. They stood before those canvases of broken seas and stormy skies and told me they felt something. That maybe they'd been through it too. For the first time since the betrayal, I realized something important. My story didn't end with what happened to me. It began with what I decided to do next. One morning, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address. Just my name, written in a familiar hand. I knew it before I opened it. Michael. Mom, I've been angry for a long time. Angry at Dad. Angry at Emily. Angry at you for keeping it all hidden. But mostly, angry at myself for not seeing it. You were right to walk away. Maybe we both needed distance to remember who we are. I'm sorry for leaving without saying goodbye. Can we meet? I'm ready if you are. I read the words over and over until the paper blurred with tears. For months, I'd prayed for that message. Now that it was here, I felt both relief and fear. Because healing means facing what's left, and sometimes that's the hardest part. We met at a small cafe halfway between the city and the coast. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. Broader shoulders, tired eyes. But when he smiled, a hesitant, uncertain smile, I saw my little boy again. We sat across from each other, the silence stretching like thin glass. He spoke first. Mom, I didn't come here to talk about them. He paused. I came here to talk about us. I nodded, unable to speak. He went on. You once told me that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's freedom. I didn't understand that until now. He took a deep breath. I'm not ready to forgive Dad. Maybe I never will. But I want to forgive myself. And I want to make things right with you. The words cracked something open inside me. I reached across the table and took his hand. It was warm, steady. There's nothing to make right, I said softly. You didn't break anything. You were just caught in the crossfire. Tears shimmered in his eyes. I missed you. I missed you too. For a moment, the noise of the cafe faded. All I heard was the heartbeat between us, the sound of something fragile being mended. After that day, we started rebuilding. Slowly. He visited the coast often. We cooked together, walked along the cliffs, talked about everything except the past. Until one evening, he finally asked, Do you ever think about them? I smiled faintly. Sometimes, but only to remember what I learned. He looked at me curiously. And what's that? That sometimes losing people isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of finding yourself. He nodded, thoughtful. I think Dad finally realized that too, he said quietly. He's living alone now. He wanted me to tell you he's sorry I let the wind carry the silence between us. There was no hatred left in me, only distance and peace. Tell him, I paused. Tell him I hope he finds the man he lost somewhere along the way. That night, I returned home and stood by the window again. The sea was calm, reflecting the moonlight like a mirror. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel broken. I felt whole. Because forgiveness isn't a gift you give to others. It's a key you use to unlock yourself. A year passed. A year of tides, paintings, letters, and silence. And slowly, the silence began to sound less like emptiness and more like peace. I'd learned that healing doesn't announce itself. It comes quietly, in small moments. The first morning you wake up without pain in your chest. The first laugh that doesn't feel borrowed. The first time you see your reflection and recognize the woman staring back. That woman was me again. The art gallery called one afternoon. They wanted to feature my work in a national exhibition, Stories of Resilience. When I hung up, I sat in stillness for a long time. Resilience. That was my word. Not revenge, not survival. Resilience. Because I had bent, but I had not broken. The exhibition opened in a glass-walled hall by the sea. Hundreds of people came, some strangers, some locals who'd watched my quiet transformation over the months. Each canvas told a piece of my story. The first, Storm Glass, was all dark grays and wild waves, my chaos. The second, Tide's End, captured the still water at dawn, my surrender. And the last, Becoming Light, was a sunrise in gold and silver tones, my freedom. As I walked through the gallery, I overheard a couple whispering near that last painting. "It feels like forgiveness," the woman said softly. I smiled, because that's exactly what it was. Later that evening, as the event quieted, I stepped out onto the terrace overlooking the water. The same sea that had once watched me fall apart now shimmered beneath the moon like an old friend. The air was cold, but gentle. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who discovered her husband's betrayal and believed her life was over. She'd died that day. But from her ashes, another version of me had been born. Not hardened, but whole. That's the thing about heartbreak. It doesn't just destroy you, it remakes you. If you let it, it carves you into someone wiser, quieter, stronger. A familiar voice pulled me from my thoughts. "Beautiful, isn't it?" I turned. Michael stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, smiling softly. He'd come to see the exhibition. "It is," I said, smiling back. "All of it." He joined me at the railing, both of us staring out at the sea. After a while, he said, "You turned pain into art, Mom." I laughed quietly. Maybe pain is art, if you survive it. He looked at me, thoughtful. "You did more than survive." I placed a hand on his arm. "So did you." The moment lingered between us, peaceful and complete. As the night deepened, the lights of the gallery reflected on the water like stars that had fallen close enough to touch. And I realized something simple, yet profound. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Daniel. Not at Emily. Not even at myself. They were chapters in a story that had to end so that a new one could begin. Months later, I received a letter from Daniel. It wasn't dramatic or pleading, just humble. "Grace, I heard about your exhibition. You always had a gift for turning pain into beauty. I've been in therapy, trying to understand the man I became. You don't owe me forgiveness, but I wanted you to know. I finally see it. All of it. Thank you for the years we did have. I hope life gives you peace. Daniel." I read it once, then folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. It didn't hurt anymore. It simply existed, like an old photograph from a life that no longer belonged to me. Forgiveness isn't a conversation, it's a quiet acceptance. And that was enough. One evening, months later, I stood again on that same cliff where my new life began. The wind was softer now, the sea calm, the horizon endless. I closed my eyes and breathed in deeply. There was no trace of the woman who'd once cried herself to sleep wondering why. No trace of the wife defined by betrayal. No trace of the victim. Only Grace. A woman who'd lost everything she thought she needed and found everything she actually was. I whispered to the wind, "Thank you for breaking me." I needed it to finally see myself, and with that, I smiled. Because endings, I realized, are just beginnings wearing disguises. And forgiveness, real, deep forgiveness, isn't letting go of the past. It's learning to walk forward without carrying it, to help. But sometimes, when she thought I wasn't looking, I caught something strange in her expression, an awareness, a flicker of guilt maybe.